Now, as we navigate the future of our region, the water situation is a crisis that cannot be ignored. It is an issue that is important for you as business leaders to be informed as well as engaged. What is the long-term outlook for our water supply, and what can we do as leaders to positively impact it? We're excited to welcome to the preview stage 5 water experts who are deeply engaged in issues involving the lower basin of the Colorado River. Our panelists are 4 people who have been deeply engaged in water issues in Nevada, Arizona, and California, and are working to find solutions. They are Secretary Bruce Babbitt. Mr. Babbitt served as Secretary of the Interior under President Clinton from 1993 to 2001. He also served as Governor of Arizona from 1978 to 1987, and in both roles, he was active in addressing Colorado River Basin issues. Next, we have, yes, of course, we can do a round of applause, everyone. Next, we have Tom Buschatzke, Director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources, who serves as Arizona's principal negotiator on matters relating to the Colorado River, and is the chairman of the Arizona Water Banking Authority and co-chair of the Drought Interagency Coordinating Council. He also represents Arizona in Indian water rights negotiations. John Entsminger, General Manager of the Las Vegas Valley Water District and General Manager of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, who is the lead water negotiator for Nevada. And Jeff Kightlinger, Interim General Manager of Pasadena Water and Power. Jeff was the Executive Officer for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California from 2006 to 2021. Where he was responsible for Metropolitan's daily water and power operations and negotiated strategic agreements on the Colorado River. And last but not least, certainly not least, leading this important conversation, please welcome to the stage Pat Mulroy, Senior Fellow for Climate Adaptation and Environmental Policy and Practitioner in Residence at the Saltman Center for Conflict Resolution at the UNLV Boyd School of Law. Ooh, there you go. Yes. Between 1989 and 2014, Pat served as General Manager of the Las Vegas Valley Water District and the Southern Nevada Water Authority. Once again, please welcome Pat.
All right. Good morning, Las Vegas. It's a pleasure to be back here again, and I can't tell you how delighted I am and privileged I feel to have this panel be able to talk to you today. You truly have the superstars of the Colorado River sitting on this panel here today. These are the people who time and again have rolled up their sleeves and have made the tough decisions, have taken the leadership roles when leadership was desperately needed. I'm going to start with one of my favorite people in the world, Bruce Babbitt. I'm not sure this community fully appreciates what Bruce did. When Bruce took over under President Clinton as Secretary of Interior and then had the tenacity to stay there for 8 whole years, he actually made the most important change that has ever happened on this river system. It was due to his relentless shepherding of the states, his relentless beating up on us, that made us finally switch from being probably the most litigious community to being one that actually finally figured out that going to court was not going to solve the problems. We didn't have enough time to keep running to court and to make that fundamental change on the river. Bruce, I'm going to ask you first, since you helped create this all-new environment, tell me, where would we be today if we still had the attitude of the 1970s and early 1980s?
Pat, I first want to say that my tenure was characterized by your relentless pursuit of Nevada's interests. And my memories of all of this are just tempered by your relentless and extraordinarily effective advocacy on behalf of the state of Nevada. We're sitting here today, 100 years to the year after we began as states working on the Colorado River with the passage excuse me, in 1923 of the Colorado River Compact. It was an important beginning, but unfortunately, it was followed by years of litigation, incredibly contentious. The antagonists were largely, but not exclusively, Arizona and California. And for 40 years, we quarreled, litigated against each other, reached incredible impasse again and again and again. And it was a really discouraging 40-year interval. It was finally settled in 1965 by the United States Supreme Court. And in the wake of that settlement in 1965, Arizona, California, and Nevada, and their leaders took a step back and began to look at our respective interests in this river, and we got together and realized that working together and creating partnerships, we could get a lot done. In the wake of that bitter 40 years, we came together and got a lot done with Pat's leadership, Jeffrey Kightlinger from California. And in retrospect, it was kind of a golden age of cooperation. Now, it's changed. And let me suggest very briefly what has changed and what it means for how it is we have to recapture this spirit of working together. The first big change, obviously, is a crisis of a magnitude that we had never imagined would be possible. All of this history sort of fades into the past in terms of what you've just heard in the slide and we'll be discussing today. This is an unparalleled crisis. Now, the second fact that we face as we come together to face the future is the table has been rearranged. The Interior Department, which was so much involved in this past golden age, was really an in-depth player. I had the privilege of working for 8 years of that, quarreling with Pat, working with Jeffrey, always in an intense, interactive relationship. We now face an age in which the table is being set rather differently, in which the Interior Department has stepped way back and left the states on their own to begin to try to confront this new age. I'm not going to pass judgment today on whether that was good or a not so good idea. But what is we have a new environment. There's an Interior Department way back there, and these players, or all of you, are right up front. The second thing that is, I think, changed a great deal is what used to be kind of close-in negotiations among just a few people is now very public. There are lots of players all over the place, and you are going to become players before this is all over, because we are now struggling to put together a new negotiation environment in which the public is going to be participating, for better or for worse. And that means not only all of us, but all of you. Finally, let me just say that the leadership of Nevada is absolutely incredible. Mr. Entsminger and his staff sent a letter on December 20th to the Department of Interior outlining a Nevada plan, which is just like fireworks being put into all of this. It is a comprehensive, careful, detailed plan, which now sets the stage for negotiations. And what I would leave you with is the underlying genius of that plan in all of its detail is it says, one, we're together, and secondly, we're going to share the pain as these incredibly difficult cuts now begin to take place. The idea is that rather than calling in all the lawyers, striking positions against other states, we're going to have to come together in a common idea that we're all in this together, and the pain's got to be shared, and that means that we've got to reduce use and delivery in proportion to the delivery and the water use that we have today. So this is a new age, and the support of the business community and your involvement and your support for your leadership are really going to make the difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Conservation is the word of the day. It's right now the only arrow in our quiver, and it is the one that all 7 states in the country of Mexico are grappling with on how to achieve cuts that, as Bruce said, have never been imagined on this river before. How do you shave 2 million acre-feet out of the lower basin? How do you shave millions out of the upper basin, or at least 500,000 out of the upper basin? How do you get economies to shift? How do you make them pivot? I thought we would stop here and before we move on with what's next, let's talk about how far we've come. Tom, I'm going to throw it to you. Where's the state of Arizona when it comes to their thinking and their actions around conservation?
So, Pat, over the years, since the 1980 Groundwater Management Act was passed, the state really led in conservation. And I know in Las Vegas, I describe Las Vegas as the hare and Arizona as the tortoise in terms of municipal conservation. We've achieved close to the same percentage reductions. When it comes to conservation for Lake Mead, however, Arizona is taking the bolt of the forced cuts under the way our agreements came out. But we've also done another 300,000 acre-feet in 2022 of conservation for Lake Mead over the 500,000 acre-feet that we had to take under our cuts. And we did that by partnering with water users, and interestingly, probably a lot of that water came from tribes. And we paid them to reduce their water use to help bolster the elevation of Lake Mead. I think moving forward, some of that can still occur, but we can't pay everyone forever moving forward. I do have the unique responsibility of having 22 federally recognized tribes in my state. The tribes in my state have half of the Colorado River water of Arizona's 2.8 million acre-feet. It creates a unique challenge, but also a unique opportunity moving forward. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to continue to do that conservation, both large and small. This past session in 2022, my legislature put $200 million on the table for municipal water providers to access to take out non-functional turf. I think that's the words we use here in Las Vegas. We probably use the words grass in Arizona, all the same thing. So we're moving forward and raising the bar in Arizona, following along with some of the things that Nevada did. And I was very supportive of John's letter that Secretary Babbitt referred to. And I think we have huge challenges ahead of us. It is going to be painful, and we all need to share in that pain equally.
Jeff, California is always the bugaboo, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thanks to you, every time there was a crossroads and California needed to come to the table, you were the only Californian that came to the table. Now what? Where are they?
California has a real love-hate relationship with the rest of the country, frankly, and the rest of the people here, and mainly focused on the hate side of it. But We really have formed, in the last couple decades, a very good, strong working relationship, originally with Southern Nevada, and also with the urban communities on the river and Phoenix and the Central Arizona people. And I really think that teamwork, that partnership between our urban areas is going to be incredibly important as we move forward. We have 19 million people in Southern California. That's 1 out of every 2 Californians live in Southern California, where I used to serve their water. And we are dependent on the Colorado River. The political muscle that California can bring, working with Southern Nevada, working with Phoenix, can really help us in Congress as we deal with what is effectively, in my view, is going to become a national crisis. We do have to work through this, find the ability to solve these issues, and we have to do it together. And I think people don't necessarily realize how closely linked Los Angeles is to Las Vegas. And it's not just because we both shared the Raiders. It's also, and Phoenix as well. We need to solve these together.
John, you came to the business community last year. You've asked them to do some heavy lifting. What have you seen as a result?
Sure. Well, I want to address some of our advantages here, because I think a lot of times, Secretary Babbitt, mentioned the 1922 compact. It's no mystery that we got the short end of the stick 100 years ago. We have a robust 1.8% of the legal entitlement to the Colorado River. But we have 3 major strategic advantages, in my opinion. The first is we can and have built infrastructure that nobody else can build. We've installed $1.5 billion worth of infrastructure out at Lake Mead, which guarantees our ability to pump water even if Lake Mead gets to that dead pool level that Jeremy showed in his presentation. The second is we're unified. Thankfully, in the early 90s, Pat and the other community leaders here in Southern Nevada formed the Southern Nevada Water Authority so that we speak with one voice when we're in these negotiations with the other 6 states. And as Tom mentioned, with 22 Native American tribes, big agricultural sectors, Jeff was polite and didn't mention the balkanization within Southern California amongst water users, but it is a major strategic advantage that our state can speak with one voice on these issues. And third is our world-leading conservation programs. And Secretary Babbitt mentioned our plan for the river, which involves shared sacrifice. Our plan for this community has and will continue to involve shared sacrifice so that we can keep all those numbers that Jeremy showed going up even as the water level continues to go down. In the last 20 years, we've added about 800,000 people to our community. And in that same time frame, our gallons per capita per day have gone down 50%, and our net water usage has gone down 26%. Just in the span of the last 3 years. Pat mentioned, the stuff that we asked for the community last year, limiting pool sizes, tearing out non-functional turf, moving to building with mechanical cooling instead of evaporative cooling. Those have all resulted in amazing numbers. From January 1, 2020 to December 31st, 2022, we added 47,000 connections across the valley. So, Durango Station, that's one connection. Every single family home, that's another connection. So 47,000 new connections. Those numbers are much higher than before the pandemic. Every single one of those 3 years was higher than 2019, 2018. And in that same 3-year period, while we added 47,000 new homes and businesses, we reduced our water consumption by another 12%. So the plan is working. The community coming together and implementing our world-leading conservation is working, but as always, conservation is not a destination, it's a journey, and we're going to have to continue on that journey for the foreseeable future.
And that is in large measure thanks to you. You as a community have done an extraordinary job. This isn't those of us who have in the past toiled in this sector or toiling in it now. It's been this community stepping up each and every time you've been asked to. And so you should feel incredibly proud of everything that you've accomplished. So my hats are off to you. Here comes the tough question. All this is fine and good, but sitting here, we all know Urban conservation alone is not going to cut it. Bruce, what needs to happen? How do you get to 2 million in the lower basin? How do you get to reduced uses in the upper basin?
In the upper basin. Well, the pattern of urban conservation has been really quite remarkable, enormously effective. Nevada's leadership in this goes without saying. I mean, you were busy tearing up your lawns at Pat's instigation before the rest of the basin had ever even thought of that. The elephant in the room now is agriculture. It's not so much a Nevada issue, but it is the absolutely undominant, unresolved issue in Arizona and California. In the lower basin, agriculture is using more than 70% of the water supply and contributing less than 5% of the GDP of the states involved. And we live in a water system called priority, in which the early appropriators on the river get priority in times of shortage. And obviously, the big irrigation districts were here 100 years ago when Las Vegas was a train stop on the way to nowhere. But
we
now,
just grew mobsters. We didn't grow corn.
Okay. The question in these negotiations is, how are we going to bring the dominant users in the basin with the oldest and most secure water rights into sharing the pain in an equitable way? And we haven't really addressed that. And we're going to need a lot of help. And Nevada is going to play an important part of this because you are dominantly an urban user. And you're going to have to mediate between Arizona and California and put some heat on to make this transition. And we were all going to have to go to Interior and Washington and invite them back into this discussion. Indeed, force them to come in and help, because they have leverage, obviously, that they're not using.
Jeff, you've got more ag in California than anywhere else on the river. They have the most senior water rights. Having known them for 30 years, they're pretty stubborn. You blasted into Palo Verde. You bought out some farms in Palo Verde. If it hadn't been for Metropolitan actually buying the agricultural land and getting into the ag business, a lot of the banking that California's been able to do never would have happened. How do we get the 900-pound gorilla of the rest of your brethren to the table?
As Bruce said, it's a huge, tremendous political challenge. Our agricultural districts have been here for over 100 years in California. They settled the land, they grow the crops, and we're not trying to be an urban versus agriculture. Everyone in our cities needs to eat, and they're growing the food. It has to become eventually some sort of partnership. What we've tried to do in places like the Palo Verde Valley on the eastern side of California, right on the Colorado River border, is Metropolitan has bought about 20% of the valley. And we occasionally, we fallow some of the land. And in the years when we fallow the land, in those dry years, and take the water off the land and move it into Los Angeles, we basically pay the same as if they had grown crops there. And that has been a good working partnership. It's worked well for the community. It's brought a lot of money into their community. And we only fallow about a third of the land at a time, at any one time, and we rotate it, and we make sure that we never go above that limit to ensure that there's an economy that stays in the valley. It's creative. We're going to have to find ways in which we keep a farming community whole, keep that thriving so we can continue to eat, but we also have to shift some of that water over to the urban community, because we can't have 75% of the water being used to grow alfalfa in this hot new climate of ours. So we do have to make that shift, and it has to be willing selling, willing buyers, and politically that's going to be really hard.
What about Arizona, Tom? You've got some pretty stubborn folks down there too.
So Pat, I'll share this story just to give some idea of how difficult it is, and we haven't come to grips with that ag to urban transfer. There was a request to move 2,000 acre-feet of water to a city in the Phoenix metro area. The federal government makes that decision, the Secretary of the Interior. They made a positive decision, and the counties along the river, including the counties in which the farmers work and live, are now suing the federal government over that decision. 2,000 acre-feet is kind of an eyedropper in a swimming pool, just to give some perspective. I think one of the things that I've been advocating for in my state is to have the losses that occur in the system be assigned to those who are using the Colorado River water and contributing to those losses. Evaporation in Lake Mead, evaporation and transpiration used by the environment from Lake Mead down to the Mexican border. That's somewhere between 1.2 and 1.5 million acre feet every year. That would go a long way towards closing the gap for 2 million acre feet in the near term. However, when I advocate for that in my state, I make sure people hear me say, I do not have the support for my farmers to do that. And if I have to go to the legislature, which I have sometimes the need to do so to sign agreements, I'm not necessarily sure I have the support of my legislature. So we have a long way to go. I've recently started to bring some of my farmers in the Yuma area into the Basin State meeting discussions directly. Hopefully that will help a little bit. But we have a lot of work to do and a lot of policy and legal issues to deal with and wrestle with in Arizona.
Well, part of the challenge is there's a lot of work to do, but not a lot of time. I mean, yes, we are seeing better snowfall this year than we have in past years, but having lived it, I know that we can wake up in April, there's a sublimation event, and it all evaporated. So resting on our laurels doesn't really get us anywhere, and hoping and praying that this snowpack makes it through the spring and actually produces runoff isn't really a solution either. So, John, what are the prognosis? Can we get there?
Well, in some ways, we're going to get there, right? Time is going to keep moving forward, and the events will play out. The question is, are we going to have a plan and gradually adapt, or are we going to have a crash landing? And I think that's the key. I think there's two keys to working with the agricultural sector. The first is getting them to accept the reality of their risk, because it doesn't really matter what your water right from the 1920s says. It doesn't matter at all what the laws of mankind say your water right is if there's no physical water reaching your diversion. And if you get to Deadpool in Lake Mead, I mean, the run of the river will still get water down to Havasu for the major cities diversions, but you're going to have agricultural districts downstream of Havasu completely out of water, 100%. And so they need to accept that risk, and the federal government needs to be the one to drive that in with a credible threat. We've seen past interior administrations be the catalyst, largely through threatening the states that they were going to take unilateral action if we failed to do so. And this administration has completely failed to do that. But the second thing with the agricultural community is there needs to be massive investment. Now, I testified in the U.S. Senate last summer, and Senator Manchin asked me if I were emperor for a day, what one thing would I do? And I didn't ask for anything for Nevada. I said the federal government needs to make massive investments into agricultural efficiencies so that we can grow the same amount of crops using drastically less water. You know, they do it in Israel, they do it all over the world. It can be done, this is possible, but we can't continue to use some of the same technologies that have been used in the past. So whether that can be achieved in the near term is to be determined, but I always answer this question of, you know, what are the alternatives to success? Well, there's a reason we built $1.5 billion worth of infrastructure to guarantee our delivery.
Jeff, I am always blown away by the absolute intransigence of people actually believing that the day could come where no water leaves Lake Mead. I don't get it. I don't understand how you sit downstream from Hoover Dam, twiddle your thumbs, and say, it won't happen. You never said that. Explain to me that mentality. It is, to me, mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling. I share that, Pat. I often, in Southern California, you know, in the Los Angeles area, when I would talk to people about Colorado River, and I'd talk to our elected leaders, they would say, of their top 10 issues they're dealing with, you know, housing, crime, transportation, traffic, schools, education, their constituents would say water is about 37 in their top 10 list. It's when you folks here, you're right in Lake Mead's backyard, you see it every day and it's there and you can see it. The agriculture sector, you know, they're driven by water and access to water. Our urban community, it's really an afterthought. Some of that's that we've been successful in managing the issues to date, but we don't have that interest. We don't have that public education that's needed to really understand what this problem is and how it's growing and how it needs to be solved. And that's what I see that the business community can really help and drive that issue for us and help us make that story known.
We've talked a lot about the lower basin, and yes, the onus for us is predominantly on the lower basin, but we are the recipients of what comes downstream from the upper basin. Do they have a role in this? Does the upper basin have some level of responsibility to help make this system work, Bruce?
Yes, of course. It's a very different kind of problem in the upper basin because down here we allocate water out of Lake Powell and Lake Mead, and it has a certain kind of coherence to it. The users in the upper basin are a lot of small projects, farms that are dipping into all of the tributary streams that come off of the Rocky Mountains. And it's a lot harder to manage all of these disparate little projects. But in a way, the upper basin has the same problem that we do. Agriculture was there early on across western Colorado, and then came the city of Denver, growing just like Las Vegas, but last on the priority totem pole. So they're still going through this internal conflict that we have here in the lower basin. Now, what is the role that they have with the lower basin? Read the Nevada letter dated November 20th to the Secretary of the Interior. Nevada, in the absence of Interior, has taken on this issue of how does the upper basin meet its obligation to continue delivering water from Lake Powell down through the Grand Canyon into the storage reservoir of the lower basin, Lake Hoover. Lake Mead. The Entsminger letter very carefully sets out a new paradigm for determining how much water is released into the lower basin in which years, wet years, dry years. It's actually an innovation in the way this has been conceived that should have been put on the table by the Interior Department at least a year ago. Silence from the Interior Department, and here's Nevada. And now, the importance of this, if I can just add one more thing to it, is we're alone among the states in the absence of Interior. We are now going to have to move together toward a collective proposal. The Nevada letter of December 20th and the Nevada plan is now the basis for trying to put together this negotiation, not only among the lower basin, but drawing in the upper basin in terms of the criteria that are put forward for how much water they release upstream from Lake Powell under what circumstances. And here we are. We are going to be negotiating these issues against the Nevada proposal. The upper basin people are talking. I mean, they haven't quite come forward with yes. There's no yes yet, but they're talking, and interestingly enough, it's all going to come back to a Nevada proposal.
John, expound on what Bruce was just talking about. What do you see the upper basin needing to do?
Well, just to put it into context, so the three lower division states, Arizona, California, Nevada, and the country of Mexico, with those evaporation and system losses that Tom referred to, we deplete off the river between 9.5 and 10 million acre feet of water a year. The four upper division states deplete 3.5 to 4 million acre feet a year. So we use more than twice as much as they do. So what we submitted to Interior was a full, headwaters to, the international border with Mexico, operational proposal, primarily for Lake Mead and Lake Powell, but also for some smaller reservoirs upstream of Lake Powell. And in that proposal, we proposed 2 million acre feet worth of cuts in the lower division states, and 500,000 acre feet of reductions in the four upper division states. So you see, we're acknowledging that the lower basin uses the lion's share of the water, and thus in our proposal takes 80% of the cuts, with the upper basin contributing 20%.
Tom, no one's ever been more cantankerous toward the upper basin than the state of Arizona. Maybe that's because you have 1 foot in the upper basin and 1 foot in the lower basin. Your predecessor was infamous for bloodying the upper basin at every opportunity he could. Where are you on this issue?
So Pat, I agree with John that in the lower basin we need to take the lion's share of the cuts, but we also need to have the upper basin actually reduce their use. And when I say that, the use that's available to them in every year, because it's very variable. It depends on how much snow there is, but it also depends on how it melts, when it melts, and how fast it melts. And so a reduction in the upper basin, because the water's not there, is not the type of reduction we need. We need a reduction when the water is available to them and someone shuts off a head gate and doesn't take the water. I think that's the struggle we're having with the upper basin. But I think it's even more important now that we're seeing some infrastructure constraints at Lake Powell and at Glen Canyon Dam. So we started seeing that about a year ago. And so it's even more important that we prop up the elevation of Lake Powell to make sure water can move past through Glen Canyon Dam in reasonable amounts. And the federal government held back 7 feet essentially of Lake Mead in Lake Powell last year. But the lower basin states at least tacitly agreed to have that happen. So there are a bunch of different risks that are coming to the fore because Lake Powell is at such a low elevation and heading towards low elevations. And I can't imagine a world in which there's no water flowing through the Grand Canyon. And I've said that to the press on various occasions, and I have folks in my state who hate it when I say that, because it paints such a dire picture, but that is a possibility if you just look at the numbers. And so many of you as chamber people, business people, we need you to help tell this story, and we need you to support the hard choices that we have to make. In my state, the business people are worried about new businesses and growth not coming to my state, and that's driving some of the view towards what I get support for and what I get opposition for as we talk about the path forward with a basin state collective alternative.
We've only got a little bit of time left, but you know me well enough to know that I'm not a big believer that you're going to be able to cut your way into sustainability. There has never been a business that's been able to cut their way to profitability, and I don't see these 7 states and 2 countries ultimately, if the trend continues and it keeps getting worse, being able to cut their way to sustainability. Jeff, California is always the target when it comes to augmentation. You have the entire coastline of the Pacific. There are any number of opportunities that we in the inland see could happen for augmentation. Where's California on augmentation?
Southern California is lucky in the sense that we have some options that other parts of the American Southwest don't. We have our Sierra Mountains in the north of our state, and we have a big Pacific Ocean right to the west of us. And we have access to those. So what is going to have to happen in terms of augmentation, we used to say we're going to augment the Colorado River by rerouting the Missouri or the Mississippi. And realistically, probably those conversations aren't going to be in our future. And certainly not our immediate future. But there are different ways to grow the pie. One of the exciting partnerships that we've done is Southern California is looking at building a $3 billion, the world's largest water recycling facility that would transform most of our sewage water into drinking water to be put in our groundwater basins. It's more water than we will need over the next 20 years. So Southern Nevada and Phoenix area are looking at partnering with us. We can return back Colorado River water. They can become investing partners in Southern California recycling. That sort of win-win growing the pie is going to be in our future. And that's the area that we're going to have to do and partner up and make those kind of possibilities actually happen.
What's the reluctance with ocean desal?
The challenge with ocean desal is that it's incredibly expensive, incredibly energy intensive, and it's very difficult to integrate into our system. As I always say, it's on the coast, and most of our growth is occurring inland. And so now you not only have to desalinate the water, you have to pump it uphill. I always say it's like getting a blood transfusion through your little toe and trying to feed your whole body that way. So we will be doing more ocean desal in our future. It's just going to be a smaller piece of the puzzle than people imagine. It's not going to really solve our problem by itself.
Tom?
So Pat, I think augmentation is something that definitely needs to be looked at. Jeff mentioned recycled water in California. We're looking at recycled water and changing the use of that in the state of Arizona. There are cities starting to talk about direct potable reuse of that water. We're also working with Mexico on potential desalination. There's a U.S. and Mexico group. I happen to be the co-chair for the U.S. side. But we're looking at 200,000 acre feet at max under that plan. We heard we need 2 million acre feet in the lower basin. So is that going to happen eventually? I think it will. The folks in Mexico are really concerned. The people on the ground, they're citizens that they have a view that desalination in Mexico for the benefit of the United States is really shifting the environmental problems that desal could cause onto Mexico. And so it's a really touchy subject. The talks are difficult, but they are continuing, and maybe we're 8 or 10 years away from a plant with Mexico to get water up into the lower basin. And California and Nevada are participating in that process on the U.S. side in that work group.
We've only got like 3 minutes left, and I wanted to extend an opportunity to anyone in the audience if you have a question for any of us up here on the panel. And I'm blinded by the light and can't see anything. All right. California needs to build more reservoirs, Jeff. Yeah, go ahead. You go do that.
Absolutely. Metropolitan built a reservoir in 2000. It was $2.1 billion, and it was a fun project to be part of. We haven't But as a state, that was metropolitan. As a state, we haven't built a new reservoir since 1960. It's not acceptable. We've added 20-some million people to our state and haven't built a new reservoir. There's plans to build a couple more, but in California, we like to sue a lot. So we got about another decade's worth of litigation, but we're hopeful a new reservoir is coming online by 2030. It's something we should be doing.
Well, that goes hand in hand with the Bay Delta. Where's that pipe?
And we need to solve our problems moving water across our Bay Delta. The last 5 governors of California have said they're planning on solving it. Our current governor has a plan, and I wish him well.
Yes.
It's not unknown that some of the other states.
Hello, Tina.
So that some of the states have got large alfalfa farms that are not necessarily owned by farmers from the United States, owned by the Saudis, owned by others. So I understand agriculture and the importance of it, but how do you justify using Colorado River for the sake of foreign countries to raise alfalfa and then send it to their countries for the sake of raising their beef? I just want to address that, and I want the entire audience to understand that this practice is even occurring.
I'll repeat your question. What Tina asked was, there are large ranching and farming operations in the lower basin, predominantly in Arizona, where the Saudis have bought land and they are growing alfalfa in the United States and then shipping it to their growing beef industry in Saudi Arabia. Tom, you get the monkey question.
So Pat, first of all, that particular enterprise does not use Colorado River water. It is groundwater. But there are other farmers in Arizona who ship overseas their products. Wheat in Yuma in the summertime goes to Italy, comes back in pasta. We have manufacturing plants. Phoenix just got a new chip manufacturing plant. That manufacturing plant uses between 25 and 30,000 acre-feet of water once it's up and running. Those chips are going all over the world. So we have a world economy. We're exporting water in everything that we essentially make and export, but we're also importing water when we import products as well. So it's a tough issue. I think the alfalfa farmers, because it's alfalfa, they're easy targets. But there is no Saudi water, Colorado water coming out of Arizona.
Well, and Tina, your question is fair, but when you look at it in terms of global economics, every cell phone battery in this room took 1,300 gallons of water to produce. Most of them were produced in China. So we are importing water with everything we bring into this country, and we're exporting it with everything we send out. Everything has a water footprint. And with that, I have bright red stop letters down there on my time clock. I want to thank you all. I want to thank this panel for taking the time to talk to our community today. And I hope you are a little wiser than when you came in here today. Thank you.